Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigelski. And today, we have, for a first round on the leadership show, his name is Mark NIETZEL. He's the commercial sales manager over at Procore. He is coming hot off the press from a President's Club award for leading his team to over 110% to quota, which is extremely hard to do considering their deal sizes and their complexity of deals. And he's about to fly to Barcelona, but before he flies to Barcelona for Club, he recorded this episode with us, and he made it very clear why he made Club as a leader. Nick, why should people listen?
Well, first of all, Mark is somebody who has literally never missed his annual number in over 6 years of selling and leading. And he gets into some really great stuff as a leader here. We spent the first half of the episode talking about some of the tools and rhythms and like spreadsheets and mechanisms that he uses to drive accountability with his reps as it relates to pipe gen and pipe progression. And another tool that he uses is a way to get very, very clear but quick pipeline updates. So if you're looking to drive accountability and get a sense of where your reps' pipes are in really, really time-efficient fashion, the first half is very, very powerful. And then we spent the second half of this talking about onsites as a leader. And so if you're a leader that is joining your reps or thinking about joining your reps in onsite deals, I would listen to that. Mark talks about how he and his team basically reignited this what felt like a ghosted deal with sort of a loose cannon CEO by suggesting an onsite. So very, very powerful back half also.
By the way, I forgot to mention this in the episode, but Mark is about to go through his lightning pipeline review framework. And in the show notes, you can find his actual lightning pipeline review spreadsheet that you can copy paste yourself.
And shocker, you'll see there are no deals in there because it reflects Armand's pipeline.
That's what happens when you're in marketing. And a 3, 2, 1, let's roll. Alrighty, Mark, welcome back to the show. We start every show with your top 3 actionable takeaways. Let's get your 3.
The first takeaway is the lightning pipeline forecast review. When I'm working with my reps on what are their forecastable deals for the month or for the quarter, oftentimes we can get stuck in the weeds, really doing deep dives on deal reviews. So a strategy that me and a lot of my colleagues started doing when I started off as an SMB manager is a lightning pipeline review. And what we do is we identified for my company the 4 criteria that we think are key ingredients of a forecastable deal. So I recognize that other businesses, y'all might have different criteria, but for my company, the criteria we care about are, is there an A-rated champion? Is there an economic buyer involved in the deal? Are you at technical fit, like the product is a good fit and is selected? And have you at least discussed a close date or a mutually aligned close date? And so we look at those 4 criteria. We put them in an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Sheet as the columns. And then we put the deals that the rep is forecasting in the rows. And we ask them a very simple yes or no question to each column. So, deal ABC, do you have an A-rated champion? Yes or no? And they can't justify, they can't explain, they can't squirm. They just have to answer one answer, yes or no. And by doing that, you get a pretty clear picture about where the gaps or the strengths are in your reps deals. So if I do this with 6 deals and all 6 of them are missing an economic buyer, it's like, all right, man, you know what you need to do this week. We need to go get in touch with some economic buyers. So a really easy tactic to just rapid fire, get to the crux of what's the health of your pipeline.
Boom. What's number 2?
Number 2 is the weekly pipeline tracker. At the beginning of every week on Monday, there's actually a reminder on my reps calendar that says, please fill out the weekly pipeline tracker. And it's a Google Sheet. And the purpose of the Google Sheet is to hold the reps accountable to being really specific with me and their colleagues. It's a shared document on what they are doing to build pipeline this week and progress pipeline this week. So there's a couple basic columns on how much pipeline did you build last week? How much are you forecasted to build this week? But specifically, the 2 columns we really care about or where we ask for detail are what are you forecasting in terms of pipe build this week and how are you going to get there? So the expectation from the reps is to forecast hey, these are the meetings I have on my calendar. I think maybe 2 out of the 3 of them are good. Here's why. And I think they're going to enter pipeline. And then also, what am I doing as an account executive to build and set meetings? So the top of the funnel activities that they're going to do. Here's my outbound strategy. Here's who I'm targeting and why. So there's a level of specificity that's required from them. And then the column right after that is what are your top 3 deal progression items? I'm not necessarily asking like, what are you going to close this week and why? I recognize that you might not always have a bunch of business that's going to close this week, but I am expecting you to be very specific. I've got 3 really key items that I got to nail this week. I have to have a phone call with the CFO who's been ghosting me for the past week. I have to have a mutual action plan call with my champion on this key quarter deal. And here's when I have it scheduled for. Examples like that. So specific examples on progressing deals and when they're going to happen.
See, I'm so disappointed that wasn't your third takeaway because you talked about the top 3 deal progression items, and it's all about your top 3 actionable takeaways. So, Mark, round us out. What's number 3?
Number 3 takeaway is no one is too good to role play and practice. Regardless of what segment you are, regardless of how long you've been in sales, everybody benefits from practicing. And in my early days as a leader, sometimes I would vent to my old boss, who was a longtime boss and mentor of mine, and I'd say, oh, the rep didn't do it this way, or they should have done it this way. And his feedback was always, well, did you role play it with them? Did you practice with them? And if the answer is no, I didn't, then I have some ownership to take on the execution of that deal. Pretty early in my leadership career, I wanted to create a culture of practicing, doing role play. So if there's an important phone call coming up with a CFO, a champion, something that you know is critical to the deal, don't just slack a talk track and say, good luck, let me know how it went. Practice it. Hop on a Zoom meeting for 5 minutes and say, hey, let's do this 2 or 3 times. And you'll be surprised at how often people have some friction with their talk track or what they think they're going to say, and they stumble over their words and they go, okay, shoot, I got to do this again. I got to do this again. And it's a really good way to fine tune those important talk tracks. I actually have a colleague who works here at my company and she's a manager as well. During her one-on-ones after doing role play, she will put herself on mute, turn the camera off, and instruct her rep to actually make that important phone call. So after they've done the role play, they'll take it a step further. And while they're on a Zoom meeting together, the rep will actually make that important phone call. So the manager can sit there, listen to the call, and then provide feedback right after.
All right, Mark. So you talked about a couple different meetings and tools that you're using to help empower your reps and keep your team on track. You talked about the lightning pipe review, this weekly pipeline tracker that folks are filling out. Can you talk to me about the relationship between those meetings, like your one-on-ones, your pipe reviews? I assume you have maybe a separate forecast meeting, a team call. Can you talk to me about like the rhythms that you're using to manage your team and how this stuff gets integrated into that?
Good question. And obviously, like, you want to avoid meeting bloat as a manager where you're not just like drowning the sales reps in like, managerial administrative meetings. But what we do stick to pretty strictly is we have, obviously, every rep has a one-on-one with me. That's 45 minutes. Sometimes it bleeds into an hour when I manage 7 folks. We also have a team forecast meeting, and that team forecast meeting is an opportunity for us to do some of that lightning pipeline review. So doing it in front of their colleagues is really smart. And then also that weekly pipeline tracker, which is that Excel sheet that they fill out at the beginning of the week. I have a reminder on their calendar to complete that by 9 a.m. every morning on Monday. So the cadence or the relationship between these tools and these meetings is Monday morning by 9 a.m., that sheet is filled out by every rep. I take the opportunity to review that on Monday. And then during my one-on-ones, I pull it up and I talk about, okay, first things first, let's talk about what your game plan is this week. Let's talk about how you're building pipeline. Let's talk about how you're progressing pipeline. I also use that lightning pipeline review either during a one-on-one, because we've got 45 minutes, so that's an adequate time to bang out a 5 or a 10-minute lightning pipeline review, or I'll do it on a team forecast session, like I mentioned earlier. So if one of my reps is calling a big month and they've got 5 deals in play, we'll pull up the sheet, we'll do it in public in front of everyone. And I think that's a really good lesson, a shared lesson with the group, because it's important to have a shared definition of what a forecastable deal is. If I'm poking holes in a rep's deal and we're defining like yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, all the other folks on the team who are, forecasting on this call as well, they know what they should be looking at in their deals.
So are you making sure that you get at least one pipeline review per rep per week? Because it sounds like you're not always doing this lightning pipe review in the one-on-one. And it sounds like if you didn't do it in the one-on-one, you put it in the team forecast meeting. Do I have that correct? Or are there weeks where you don't feel like you need to do a full pipeline review and the forecast will just suffice?
I say we're basically doing it every week in some form or fashion. So obviously, if you're a newer rep or if you have less pipeline, there's less data to review. I think we might skip it for a week or two. But by the time you're a fully ramped account executive, in some form or fashion, either in the team forecast or in the one-on-one, we're doing a pipeline review.
Mark, one thing that you were talking about in the pre-show is you've got this Excel sheet that you have where the rows are the deal names and then the columns are those criteria you're using, and you are pushing people to either say yes or no other detail. And that is to avoid the story time that a lot of pipeline reviews do, where do we have an A-rated champion on this? And 14 minutes later, they've told you a story about this person's life history, etc. And you're like, oh gosh, we've got 12 more deals we need to go through. I'm curious, you talked about like the poking of holes. When you're getting these binary answers, yes or no, how do you know where you need to poke holes? And what do you ask to actually do that?
My intention with these yes or no binary answers is to kind of avoid the spiel that you get often when a rep is trying to explain a deal. But B, if we have a shared definition of what the key criteria are to close a deal, and it's all agreed upon, which most people at my company, I think, agree that these are the ingredients we need to close a deal, it allows us to be a lot more pointed in our feedback, and it allows us to poke holes more accurately. Like, I'm not just being a cynic. I'm like, okay, we've seen 100 deals close at my company in the past 2 quarters. Like, almost all of them had an economic buyer involved. I'm not saying you 100% need an economic buyer to get the deal done, but like, if you don't have it, the chances of it happening are a lot less. So what we do with these lightning pipeline reviews is we identify the deals that are on the sheet and we look at the key ingredients they're missing. And then there's a column all the way on the right side of the Excel sheet, and it's just action items. We'll just say, all right, cool. Like, you're missing an economic buyer on 4 out of these 6 deals. Your action item is to call the economic buyer. It's to ask your champion for permission to call them. It's to look them up in Zoom info. It's to look at their website and find out who the economic buyer is. So we have an action item section of it at the end of the deal review or at the end of the pipeline review that basically says, here's what you're going to do to fill that gap and turn all of those binary yeses or nos into yeses.
My guess is there have been times where someone says, yeah, an economic buyer's involved, or yeah, I have a rated champion. And what that means is I sent an email to the economic buyer and I have a champion. They're an analyst who has no power whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that these binary yes nos for the 4 criteria, they did it the right way? They accomplished the criteria the correct way.
You know, it's funny, we're even talking about Excel sheets, and while they are very useful, I think we also have some really powerful technology in our hands these days as sales managers, like a Gong, and I know there's other softwares out there like Chorus and things of that nature, but I have the benefit of being able to back channel this, and I think it's really important to trust your reps, but there's also, trust but verify. I'm pretty religiously in Gong 24/7. I'm able to look at the activity tab in Gong that sees what went down, and I'll look at that, I'll back channel that, I'll verify it, I'll watch it during call coaching. I think that's one way that I test the truth and the veracity of those yes/no answers. And then additionally, we have really good definitions of what an A-rated champion is at my company. The way that we define a champion at my company is A, do they have personal pain that my product solves for? B, do they have political and technical clout in the organization? And C, do they have the ability or at least the knowledge on how to get a deal done? And so those 3 things are pretty clear criteria that I can push the rep on. If they're like, yeah, I think I got a champion on this. I'm like, how do you know? Do they meet all 3 of these criteria? Have we tested them on it? So there's an ability for me to push them a little bit on it if I'm hearing a wishy-washy answer.
You talked about the back channeling with call reviews, and I'm wondering, do you have like a rhythm or a set schedule for going and like verifying this stuff or reviewing your reps' calls, or is it more of an ad hoc thing where it's like, they had a really important one and you decide to go watch it, or they ask you to go watch one? Because one thing I've been running into is I feel like I get pinged randomly or I get pulled in randomly to like review a call. Sometimes I feel like I'm doing it because I need to avoid like the higher leverage, more important work. And I'm sitting there watching a call and I'm like, should I be mechanizing this? I guess I'm curious how you do it, Mark, because you have a bigger team than me.
I do both. So there's a regular cadence that I watch calls where I'll block off time on my calendar. My Thursdays and Fridays tend to be a little bit lighter than my Monday through Wednesdays because I have less one-on-ones at the end of the week. So I will block off time on my calendar, like typically 2 hours at a time on a Thursday and a Friday. And that's explicitly for Gong call reviews. So there's always time at the end of the week for me to watch calls. I'll watch them at like 1.25 or 1.5x speed. I'll maybe skim through the more technical parts of the product to save me some time and really focus on the execution piece. So there's dedicated time, 4 hours of my calendar a week to do that. And then I also do what you suggested and more ad hoc, like, okay, I know my rep Joe Schmo had an important call on Monday afternoon. First thing I'm going to do on Monday morning while I'm having my coffee is watch that call because I know it was important. So I try to do both. And my leader, who's a second line manager, he does a really good job of holding us accountable to call coaching. I think it's awesome. It's the same way that I hold my reps accountable to items. My VP holds me accountable to call coaching. Gong has a coaching metrics section where it'll tell you like over a rolling 30 days or over a rolling 90 days, like how many calls has Mark Nitzel listened to, how many calls has he joined, how many calls with comments has he listed. And our VP gets a weekly digest where he emails that and he sends it to the managers. And so we know like how many calls we're listening to. And I think it's important to hold us accountable to that.
I think it's the temptation to always jump onto the call with the rep because you can jump in and you can be helpful on that call. But you have to remember that that is the least efficient way to cover deals and coach your reps. It is the least efficient way because it takes an hour of your time. If you spend 1 hour and you're really efficient at ripping through tape recordings, you can get through 3, sometimes 4 tapes if you're targeting the right parts of the call in a single hour. The biggest thing is, Nick, to your point, people don't schedule it on their calendars in the same way they schedule a customer call. So one thing that was really, really helpful for me is just as a forcing function is once per rep. When I was a VP of sales, I had 30 reps on my team. Once per month, every single rep, we had these rapid fire call reviews scheduled on the calendar where I would actually walk the rep through multiple of their calls live. That would allow us to get through so many more calls, but also it would be so much easier for me to not like skip it because it was a meeting on my calendar, not just something that was like floating in the back of my head. So I like how you're stacking it with other things that are going on in your world too.
What you mentioned around like it's not sustainable or it's not the most efficient way to help your reps is to join every call. Like I was very guilty of that when I first started in management, and we'll talk about this at a later point in the interview. But you know, the desire to jump on calls because you're good at it and you know the product, it's a balance that you have to make where there is a time to step in and join a call, but it's not sustainable and it's not the most efficient way to create a team of success. So yeah, sometimes it's hard to not join that call and actually watch it instead, but that's an important skill as a manager.
You actually put something in the prep doc, Mark, around, you said it's not always the right thing to join every single call, but it's important to have this mentality of always being willing to throw down with your reps to show that you're not the manager who's like feet up on the desk saying, yeah, you go close them, I'll be chilling here watching the dashboards. And you put a note here about like, you're really intentional around, it sounds like joining onsites. And so I guess I'm curious, we talked about you're not on everyone. Talk to me about the live joining of calls with your team with prospects.
It's not sustainable or efficient to join every call, but it is important for me to recognize that like one of the most valuable assets I have as a sales leader at my company is I know the product really well. I know the sales cycle really well. I've been in these reps' shoes before. I don't want to blunt that strength too much. Like that's definitely a strength that I can help my reps with. I encourage my reps to use me as a technical resource if their primary technical resource is not available due to like a scheduling snafu or, you know, we've got a solutions engineer that's on site all week. I don't want to let a deal delay a week because we don't have a primary technical resource. So that's an example where I give my reps permission to use me as a technical resource so that we can shorten the sales cycle and not let us internally get in the way of a deal closing. That's an example of me being willing to throw down. And then traveling to onsites, which is what I put on the doc. Visiting customers face to face is something that our customer profile, our prospects really value in our industry. Obviously, you can't be on the road 24/7. Some industries there are, but this is primarily a technical Zoom-based sale role, but we do still visit customers quite a bit. And for key customer visits, I want to make sure that I can prioritize being there to A, provide my rep air coverage, B, I think I can provide a really confident presence in a room and command a room. That's a skill set that I have as a seller. And I think I can really help my rep and show them what good looks like. And so oftentimes that's where I will offer my resources as a manager that's, you know, willing to get in the trenches with the reps and throw down as, yeah, you're going to the middle of nowhere for a customer visit and you need some backup because it's intimidating and you're going to be in a conference room with a bunch of other people. Like, I'm going there with you. Let's do it together.
Yeah, there's a clear distinction where Mark, you're joining these calls, you're joining these onsites, not just to coach your reps, but really because you're trying to increase or enhance your chances of winning the deal because you can bring a certain X factor to the deal. If you were just trying to coach your reps, you would listen to the calls. But in both these cases, you're really saying, okay, I think I can add some value to this deal that I couldn't do on a call recording.
So, Mark, I want to ask you about some of these on-sites because we've interviewed one of your colleagues before, and she was sharing with us about they're a really important part of your deals. Like your customers really value it. It was similar for me when I sold to law firms. I was traveling all the time, and we would do these 6 to 8 hour full day demos where we change the room multiple times. And I understand that your sale has some similarities there. I'm curious, for folks that are maybe just starting to do on-sites or their business is putting more priority on them or they've taken a new role where that's something what guidance or best practices would you give to people when they're going and meeting customers on-site?
It's a really fun part of the job. It's a really intimidating part of the job too. It's very different than sitting in front of a computer and doing things on Zoom or Teams. I think it's an exciting part of one's professional development is to sit in a conference room with a bunch of decision makers and business owners and actually shake their hand. The advice that I would give to sellers is, first of all, embrace the fact that this is a really cool part of your professional development. This is doing something that is going to pay huge dividends on your professional development and make you a better person, is to meet with people, look them in the eye, and do your job. So I think that's the first piece is it's a luxury and it's a privilege to be able to do it. But outside of that, more tactically, prepare. That's my advice. I just had a rep who was driving from Santa Barbara to Los Angeles. It was a little bit more informal of an on-site meeting. And the feedback that I gave to that rep was, hey, this meeting went great, but I don't necessarily think you prepared adequately for this. You had one point of contact. That was the only person that you were emailing beforehand. The agenda was pretty basic. It was 4 line items. This is what I think we're going to cover today. And you didn't print out any paperwork beforehand. And I think with the types of folks that we work with, I serve to construction companies, it really helps to come with a narrative and some documentation to back up what you're talking about. And my advice to this rep was to call each person that's going to be in the conference room individually and say, hey, Armand, I'm looking forward to the meeting. I've been primarily working with Nick to schedule this, but I'd like to get 5 minutes of your time right now so I can find out what's the most important thing for you in this in-person meeting. What can I come prepared with for you specifically? And taking that time to individually reach out to all of the folks that are going to attend and make sure you know what they care about, I think is really important for an in-person meeting. And then I mentioned printing stuff out. I actually think that's really helpful. We print out our product lineup so people know okay, these are the products that we could potentially buy with these folks. We'll print out an implementation timeline so they can see it. I think some of that tangible stuff goes a long way when you're meeting with people in person.
I had a really similar experience when I was selling to law firms where, I did the one where it's all right, we only talked to the COO and we show up and there's 12 other people in the room and they throw the agenda off course because they have stuff that they want covered. And yes, in a perfect world, the COO rallies everybody and they send you all the agenda items. But in practice, that doesn't really happen. You almost get to break the seal of multi-threading when you do what you suggested, which is you have a reason to call all of these people. You're meeting with them in person. You're getting on a plane, a train, a car, a bus. You might be hitchhiking if you're Armand. You're showing up and you have every right to say, hey, I'm going to be meeting with you. What do you want covered? And so you break that seal. I also want to echo the paper stuff. It seems so strange, maybe because I was selling to law firms. We'd have attorneys who didn't know how to work a computer. And the printed stuff, you'd be amazed out of the blue to be oh, what's this other product? I want to see that. That's cool.
I liked what you were saying a moment ago about you sort of earned the right to multi-thread when you're going to an onsite. That's exactly what I told my rep when I was pressing this individual a little bit on hey, why don't you think that you reach out to those folks? And his response was the CFO has been kind of hard to get in touch with. I feel like Tony, my main guy, has he's being a champion. So I feel like I have what I need in order to have a successful onsite. And my response to him was exactly what you just said, Nick. It's dude, you're driving 2.5 hours to Los Angeles in rush hour traffic. You've earned the right to call the other people that are going to be in the meeting. You should call them. They should expect a phone call from you. You're not being an annoying salesperson by doing this. You're doing your job. You're preparing.
Mark, when you're talking to your reps or you're doing your pipeline reviews, you probably see certain deals where it's this one's too early for an onsite. This one too late. We've already gotten through most of the sales cycle. Don't slow it down with an onsite. Where do you usually have your reps place this in their sales process?
My caveat that I would add is if the rep is local to their territory, like the example of this person I was just mentioning a moment ago, some of that limiting criteria is lessened by the fact that hey, if you just need to hop in the car and drive for an hour and a half, I actually think like you should try to get on site as much as possible. But if you're working a customer that's in a different area that you need to get on a flight for or something of that nature, where we typically see the on-site being placed or strategically being used is somewhere between stage 2, which for us is discovery at my company, and stage 4, which is the proposal time. You've gotten past the stage 2, you know that they're potentially interested in your product, you've done adequate discovery, you've validated that these people are a potentially good fit for your product, and either you've got a bunch of technical stuff remaining, and so therefore it's good to just get an on-site meeting and bang it all out in a 4-hour meeting. That's what I did just a couple of days ago last week. We just did a bunch of technical work over a 4-hour meeting, and it benefits to have everybody in the same room to just knock it all out at once, as opposed to like, several different Zoom meetings over the course of a few weeks. That's a really common area where we will strategize an on-site, or a little bit later than that, one stage later than that. You've done some of the technical leg work, and maybe there's one more technical call left, or maybe it's like half technical call and you're kind of transitioning into like the proposal. You're like, hey, why don't we do all this in one in-person meeting? We'll wrap up the technical stuff, and then we'll spend the remainder of the on-site going over dollars and cents, implementation, etc. And those are the ones we see are really effective, where you essentially condense the latter half of the sales cycle into like one day, because you got everybody in the room, you're kind of done with the technical stuff, and it's like, all right, man, we're here in your conference room, and like everything seems to be going smoothly. What do we need to do in order to earn your business? You have the permission to accelerate the deal a lot more when you're right in front of them.
I'm curious if you have like a success story or a deal where you were like, we literally won this deal, or we accelerated it, or we got to power because of the on-site, just so people can understand how this can actually impact their own sales cycles.
My rep had a inbound lead come in January where we had a technical demonstration over Zoom. Good meeting. A lot of the product was a good fit. We were getting thumbs up. These folks were pretty guarded. They kind of kept their opinions close to the chest. We basically didn't hear from them for 2 months. We thought the deal was dead, but we were going to be in that prospective customer's neck of the woods for another customer on site. And so we just shot an email to the office admin and said, hey, we're going to be in your neighborhood for the next 2 days. Can we drop in for lunch and finish where we started from earlier? These folks said yes. We dropped into the office, same group of people that were in the conference room, except there's a guy sitting in the back who's the CEO of the company that we had never seen before. Basically, the whole on-site meeting, which we had scheduled to be more technical in nature and a demonstration, it was maybe 25 minutes of demonstration, and then it was 45 minutes of talking implementation with the CEO. We had never been introduced to that guy earlier in the deal. He kind of seemed like a loose cannon at the beginning of the meeting, but he was a really sharp guy. And I think he was very impressed with our commitment to meet them in person, our preparation in terms of what we had set as an agenda for the on-site, and the professionalism that we showed when we came to the in-person meeting. What was supposed to be an hour and a half of demonstration was basically 20 or 30 minutes of demonstration. And the CEO basically said, like, I think I've seen all we need to see in terms of the product. Like, let's talk about what's next. And I just don't think you're getting that sort of reaction if you're doing it over a Zoom meeting. And you've got all these people in separate places. I think we would have probably followed the agenda. And not to say we wouldn't have closed the deal. I think it might have happened anyway, but we had that acceleration and that trust with the decision maker because we were sitting in his conference room that we otherwise did not have in the deal.
How did you decide and how did you orchestrate that pivot on the fly? You get into the room, you're like, oh shit, the CEO is just sitting there. You had a whole technical game plan. You and your rep now need to be synchronizing your thoughts and realize, oh, this is a CEO meeting. This is not a SOC 2 type 2 integrations meeting anymore. How did you make that pivot on the fly?
In this live situation on the fly, I think there was a little bit of us just trusting our gut. My rep and I looked at each other from across the conference room. We kind of realized like, okay, agenda might be going out the window here, but like, let's ask a prospective customer. We said, hey, like we've got a whole hour set aside to go through some of the stuff we showed you guys in January. We definitely are capable of doing that if you think that's the most important thing. We're kind of picking up the vibe right now that like you're already at technical fit. Are we off base on that assumption, or do you feel like this is a thumbs up? So we just did a gut check with the folks in the room and we just kind of asked them for permission. And I think the important thing is we gave both options. We said, hey, we're prepared to demo. We're totally down to make this a technical demonstration. We're kind of picking up the signals that you might already be sold on the product. Is that a correct assumption? And the answer was unequivocally yes from the folks in the room. And that's what gave us the confirmation that like, hey, let's move to the next step. Let's start talking about implementation.
Mark, that is a hell of a way to end this episode. We have to move to the final question, and I actually want to twist it based on something that you shared with us earlier. You mentioned that one of the bad habits that you broke as an early sales manager was when you realized you don't have to be on every single call. You are now a tenured manager. So what is something that you've now learned In addition to that, as a seasoned leader, that is something that was a bad habit that you broke when you just started out as a manager.
I needed to recognize that not every seller is going to sell like me. And that doesn't mean that they're not going to be a successful account executive. And I have a bias towards folks that sell like me. And it took probably a year of managing to see enough positive evidence of folks that didn't sell like me, but still kicked butt. And I probably saw that as an individual contributor, but as a manager, I needed to see it in real time, managing 7 different people and recognizing that 4 of them are probably your prototypical guy like me, and 3 of them weren't. And those 3 people could still succeed really well. And that was a learning lesson that I think I was able to buck that bias a little bit. And it's allowed me to be a more objective and a more supportive manager because I recognize that there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat and everyone can be successful.
Amazing. Round 2, first round on the leadership show. Everyone hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Alrighty, Nick, it's time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Mark NIETZEL. What do you have for your 2?
So my first one is the lightning pipe forecast review, where you are going to plot on an Excel spreadsheet your 4 criteria that you believe give you a sense of should you or shouldn't you forecast a deal. For Mark, he used, do we have an A-rated champion? Do we have an economic buyer involved? Are we a technical fit? And have we discussed a close date with the buyer? So that's what the columns are. The rows are going to be your reps' individual deals. And then what you need to get your reps to do is fill out binary yes or no for each of these deals. That avoids story time, elongated story time, and gives you a very clear picture of what's going on with the deals. So get your reps to do that to get a very quick snapshot of the pipe. Number 2 is actually a surprise 5th column that Mark talked about midway through the episode, which is for action items. So what you're going to do is once you've gone through the lightning pipeline review, now you've got that action items column where you can have the rep fill out what are the actions they are going to take to get the no's to become yeses.
Number 3, you want to review this sheet once a week, either in the one-on-ones or in the team forecast, and you want to train your team on what good looks like for each of these criteria. So for example, Mark gave us very clear criteria for what a champion is. It was personal pain, technical clout, and knowledge of how to get a deal done. So define that for each of your pipe review criteria or your stages so your reps don't misnomer any deal in a stage or claim that deal's forecastable when it's not. And then lastly, number 4, you want to watch calls to coach for skills. You want to be on calls for the deals that you're trying to get done, especially when it comes to onsites. One bonus tip for you, Mark has his team doing onsites between stages 2 and 4. That's usually after discovery, before proposal. And my favorite way that he's using those onsites with his rep is he's consolidating all of the last parts of the sales cycle into one super day instead of doing 3 weeks of vendor review. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out?
Honestly, Mark has joined us many times on the show, and if I were a rep looking for a job, I have no idea if Mark is hiring or not. He is somebody that I would want to attach to in my career. So if I'm you, even if you're not looking for a job, I would go on LinkedIn. I would send a nice note to Mark because you never know and you might want to be connected with him. Seriously, Mark, if you're listening, thank you for bringing your expertise to 30 MPC. And listener, thank you for listening. We'll see you next week on the show.